Chapter 1. The inciting incidenti have never been prone to melodrama, yet even now, as I recount that fateful evening, the memory sends a chill down my spine. It was the kind of night one might describe as grandly ordinary. The polished drawing rooms of Sir Reginald Blanchard's Mayfair townhouse gleaming beneath crystal chandeliers, the soft laughter of high society echoing through corridors lined with masterpieces. Yet by midnight, a single, peculiar object, a painted swan featherwood, cast those gilded halls into a very different light. My name is Captain Arthur Hastings, and though I am often wont to admire Hercule Poirot's triumphant denouement, on this night I found myself staring in utter bewilderment at a scene that bespoke cruelty disguised as art. Earlier that evening, Sir Reginald had hosted a private unveiling of his latest acquisition, the famous plume de cygne, a perfectly preserved swan feather upon which the avant-garde painter Lucille Vigne had captured, in exquisite miniature, the shifting iridescence of the bird's plumage. The rumour murmured through London's art circles was that Vigne's work contained hidden symbolism, perhaps even a message encrypted in the feather's delicate contours, but none could have foreseen the darker meaning it would assume. It was Lady Blanchard herself who discovered the body. I was lingering by the display case, incongruously close to the feather's glass enclosure, when gasps and a sharp cry from Lady Blanchard shattered the polite hum of conversation. I remember how the guests froze an almost choreographed stillness before surging toward the library doors from which her panicked voice had issued. I hurried after them, heart pounding, to find the mahogany doors swung wide and a scene of horror beyond. There, slumped across a burgundy settee, lay Mr. Edward Marsh, the Blanchards' trusted curator. His once crisp evening suit lay rumpled. One pale hand was draped limply over the arm of the settee, while the other clutched that very feather, its painted surface smeared with a dark, unfamiliar stain. At first I thought it was ink, perhaps the remnants of some nefarious theatrical trick, but the scent that drifted through the fragrant warmth of cedar panels was unmistakable. Blood. Sir Reginald and Lady Blanchard were kneeling at Marsh's side, her trembling fingers still pressed to his chest. A small, ornate letter-opener lay discarded on the Persian carpet, its blade glinting faintly under the lamplight. The gathering crowd had fallen silent, their expressions a maelstrom of shock, curiosity, and dread. This cannot be," Lady Blanchard whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "Edward was like a son to us." Sir Reginald rose, his face pale but composed. "No one is to leave the house," he commanded, his voice steady. "We shall call the police." Yet, even as the household staff hurried to obey, which in itself spoke volumes about the gravity of the moment, I recognized that this was no ordinary crime scene to be entrusted to Scotland Yard. There was something inherently theatrical about the staging. The feather, a delicate work of art, pressed in Marsh's hand as though he had intended to reveal its secret at the last moment. The position of the body, chosen to display that very feather to any onlooker. And above all, the absurd precision of the wound, a single, clean puncture to the heart, indicating a murderer with nerves of steel and an eye for the dramatic. I exchanged a look with Lady Blanchard's lady-in-waiting, Mrs. Cartwrighter, woman of discreet reserve, who had only moments before been greeting guests with a composed smile. Now her lips trembled as she murmured, "It's almost too perfect." Her words, uttered in a hush, seemed to capture the truth of the matter, as the household servants began to usher guests back toward the drawing-room to await the arrival of the constabulary and to quell the panic. I felt a small, insistent voice in my mind. this was no random act of violence. The murderer had chosen not only the moment, but the tableau, using art itself to convey a message. I steeled myself, for in an instant I knew that tonight would demand the little grey cells of Monsieur Poirot. I turned away from the body to address the gathering crowd, hoping to restore a measure of calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, attempting an authority I scarcely felt, "I beg your patience. The situation will be managed, and you will all have an opportunity to provide statements. Meanwhile, I must ask you to remain here, please. Follow Mrs. Cartwright back to the drawing-room." "A patrician, older gentleman, sir, Charles Wainwright," I recalled. A businessman with ties to Sir Reginald stepped forward. His lined face was grave. "Hastings," he asked quietly, "what do you make of this?" I hesitated. "It is far from straightforward, Sir Charles. I have never seen anything quite so poetic in a murder." He nodded, as if that explained everything. "I heard that Poirot was in London. Would it not be wise to fetch him at once?" I could not suppress a smile. "Indeed, sir, if you will permit me, I shall send for him immediately." With permission granted, I retreated to Sir Reginald's study, where a telephone and a decanter of brandy awaited. As I dialed the familiar number, my hand trembled not with fear, but with the anticipation of the intellectual challenge to come. If only Monsieur Poirot could decipher the message hidden in that painted feather before the killer struck again. The line crackled. For a moment I heard nothing but the distant murmur of London's night. Then, in his unmistakable tones, "Hastings, mon ami, to what dastardly predicament do you summon me at this late hour? Poirot, it's serious. Edward Marsh has been murdered, stabbed through the heart, and he's been found clutching the plume de cygne, that painted swan feather, in Sir Reginald Blanchard's townhouse." Silence. Then, good heavens, and the police? "They have not yet called. Not until just now," I replied. "Sir Reginald has ordered no one to leave TRS-Bean," said Poirot. "I shall be with you within the hour. And Hastings, take care. The murderer may yet watch us with malignant intent." As I replaced the receiver, I looked once more at the display case that had held the feather mere hours ago. The glass now stood ominously empty, its locks intact, suggesting the killer had escaped through other means, or intended for no one to remove the feather, but rather to implicate the very object itself. All of London's whispered theories about Venier's hidden code suddenly seemed trivial beside the question now burning in my mind. What secret lay encoded in that painted swan feather, and who would kill to protect our rivulet? Thus did the affair commence. A noble household plunged into terror by an act of almost artful violence. A mysterious relic entrusted with untold significance, and the promise of a challenge that only Hercule Poirot's extraordinary intellect could unravel. And so I awaited his arrival, certain that the night ahead would be one I would never forget. Chapter 2. The First Clues. I confess that when one has spent many years as Monsieur Poirot's companion, one becomes inured to the spectacle of a crime scene. Yet nothing prepares you for the hush that fell over Sir Reginald Blanchard's drawing-room once the news had travelled. The grand salon, with its velvet settees and gilt-framed mirrors, was now transformed into an arena of hushed whispers and furtive glances. Guests clustered around tiered trays of untouched canapes, voices low as autumn wind through bare branches. In the centre, Monsieur Poirot's small, precise figure stood like a fulcrum amid swirling curiosity, his gaze fixed on the intricate mosaic of clues laid before him. I, too, surveyed the scene with renewed focus. The police had arrived in force. Inspector Morton of Scotland Yard among them, yet even he regarded Poirot with an almost deferential wariness. I hovered at the periphery, partly from respect for Poirot's methods, partly from a creeping unease. The killer still walked among us. Mon cher Hastings, Poirot said quietly, beckoning me to his side. Observe first, reserve judgment until you have all the facts. He tapped a gloved finger against the glass of the display case that once held the painted feather. The case remained unlocked, yet no one had dared disturb it since Marsh's body was carried away. Note that the locks were not forced, Poirot murmured. Either the murderer had a key or wished us to believe he did not need one. I crouched for a closer look. The lock's mechanism was ornate, its wards aligned with a specialized skeleton key, one that I recalled Sir Reginald kept under loose floorboards in his office. Do you think the killer extracted the feather and then returned the case to its proper place? I asked. Poirot's little mustache twitched. Perhaps, but note this, the hinges bear a faint smudge of violet pigment. He produced a spotless white handkerchief, unfolded it, and pressed the tip against the hinge. A pale violet stain transferred onto the cloth. This paint is identical to the tone used in the feather's artwork. My pulse quickened. So, the feather was handled after it was painted, exactly, and not by an artist intent on preservation, rather by someone who wished to leave a signature. Poirot rose, his keen eyes sweeping the gathering. Let us proceed to the library, where Marsh fell. We made our way along a carpeted corridor, past anxious guests, murmuring apologies and assurances. In the library, wax vests of light flickered against mahogany shelves. The Persian carpet was stained a deep carmine red. There lay the curved letter opener, its handle carved with the Blanchard family crest. The blade, however, was unremarkable, save for a peculiar pattern of microscopic scratches near the hilt. Look, Hastings, Poirot whispered, leaning down. Observe these fine abrasion marks. He tapped the blade lightly, then held it up to the lamplight. Such scratches arise when a blade is slipped in and out of a scabbard or sheath, again and again. But no sheath for this opener exists among Sir Reginald's possessions, nor in any museum records of his collection. I nodded. Someone moved it frequently, perhaps to practice the motion, or to prepare the hand, Poirot said. The murderer anticipated the moment, rehearsed the plunge. My stomach churned. But why leave the weapon? Why place the feather in Marsh's hand? Ah, my friend, that is the puzzle. Poirot bent to examine the feather, now preserved in a protective envelope on the desk. Under magnification, he studied its painted surface. Here, on this side, there is a single broken bristle just there, near the quill's base. He pointed with a slender probe. It appears the feather was seized roughly, perhaps torn from Marsh's fingers after he fell. I peered closely. Indeed, the bristle's tip was jagged, coated with dried blood and a trace of emerald green pigment. Green, but the swan's feathers were painted in violet and silver hues. Precisely, Poirot murmured. This green is from another source. He gestured toward the mantel, upon which stood several botanical illustrations framed in ebony, images of exotic birds painted by Lucille Vigneaux during her travels in India. One, in particular, depicted the blue-throated peter with emerald green accents on its feathers. I suspect our murderer has access to Vignaux's studio, at least to her palette. I frowned, but Lucille Vigneaux is in Cannes, according to her agent. And yet her work circulates, Poirot replied. Someone here may have studied her earlier pieces, copied her colours. He straightened, scanning the assembled guests through the library's mullioned windows. Observe how they stand. Lady Edith Blanchard hides behind the register cabinet. Sir Charles Wainwright paces near the door. Mrs. Cartwright perches upon the settees, arm close enough to overhear, yet careful not to touch anything. I followed his gaze to Lady Edith, whose powdered face was drawn with anxiety. She seems almost guilty of witnessing. Poirot shook his head. Do not confuse fear for guilt. Yet I invite you to note the odd absence among the evening's souvenirs. Souvenirs, I echoed, puzzled. In creating an exhibit, Sir Reginald provided each guest with a small booklet of the artwork full colour. Reproductions of several notable pieces, including the plume de cygne. But note, one booklet is missing. Poirot pointed to a low table by the hearth. Each booklet bore the Blanchard crest and was sealed with a crimson ribbon. 3 lay neatly stacked. The 4th was gone. Marsh's copy, I realized. He must have had it with him, and it is nowhere to be found, Poirot concluded. Either the murderer took it perhaps to remove a specific page, or Marsh clutched the feather instead of the booklet in his final moments. He paused, tapping the side of his nose. What message might one hide in those reproductions? A name, a date, or perhaps a code known only to a select few. My mind raced. So we have a stolen or hidden booklet, a feather smeared with pigment from another painting, and a practiced blade. And the culprit left the swan feather as an accusation or as misdirection. Misdirection, always, Poirot said with a glint in his eye. But of what? Let us now examine the entry logs. If one key was used tonight, it must appear in the house staff's records. We crossed to a small desk piled with ledgers. Mrs. Cartwright hovered nearby, her composure regained but her hands still quivering. She indicated the ledgers. Here, sir, we record every unlocking of display cases, every movement of the study's door, though in times such as these, those entries may not tell the whole truth. Poirot leafed through the pages, his eyes narrowing. Here, 10:37 p.m., display case unlocked by Marsh. 10:42 study door opened by Marsh. 10:47 study door opened again by 1R, Blanchard. And then, nothing until the alarm. Blanchard, I muttered. But the study door remained unlocked after Marsh entered. Who was R? Blanchard at 10:47. Sir Reginald himself, Poirot confirmed. Yet he claims he did not enter the study until he heard Lady Blanchard's scream. I looked to Sir Reginald, who stood by the door, his posture rigid. A discrepancy, I said. Did you enter, Sir Reginald? He patted his pocket decisively. I held my key, of course, but I did not enter. I only thought to inspect the scene once I heard the disturbance. His voice was firm, too firm, perhaps. I could not tell if he lied or if memory had betrayed him under stress. Poirot closed the ledger and rose. Hastings, we have our first contradictions, the violet smudge, the foreign pigment, the missing booklet, and this errant entry. But remember, contradiction is the lifeblood of deduction. Tonight, every inconsistency will point us closer to the truth. He turned toward the door. We must gather our suspects. Later, I shall quiz each one on every minute of this evening. Until then, let nothing be moved and no one be trusted to their first account. As the inspector began sealing the room, I felt the weight of the evening deepen. Already, the threads of deception had begun to weave a tangled web, and at its center, like a shard of poisoned crystal, lay the painted swan feather, silent, accusing, and more mysterious than ever. Chapter 3. The the gathering of suspects. The corridor beyond the library seemed unnaturally long as I escorted each of the principal guests back to Sir Reginald's drawing room. The hush that had settled over the estate lingered, broken only by the creak of polished floorboards and the soft click of the heavy oak doors closing behind us. Monsieur Poirot remained behind with Inspector Morton, peering at the ledger beneath the lamplight, but I knew that he would soon join us. It was time to assemble the circle, for in confinement lies revelation by the time I returned to the grand salon, for figures had already taken position in a loose semicircle. Lady Edith Blanchard, Sir Charles Wainwright, Lucille Venier's agent, Mr. Garrick Thornhill, and Mrs. Cartwright, the Blanchards' gentlewoman of the household. Each bore a countenance marked by unease, their earlier composure strained by the weight of suspicion. 2 additional guests, Sir Reginald's niece, Miss Clementine Blanchard, and the renowned art critic, Miss Rosalind Fane, were ushered in by servants, completing the closed gathering. Monsieur Poirot entered almost theatrically, his precise footsteps echoing through the silent room. He carried a slim notebook and a small pencil, tools as indispensable to his little grey cells as the feather itself. Mise, Amos. He began, bowing slightly to the group. We are all assembled now. This evening, tragedy has struck not only this household, but the very spirit of art and trust. Each of you was present when Edward Marsh met his unfortunate end. It is only with your cooperation that we can uncover the truth. He motioned toward Lady Edith, whose pale face glowed in the lamplight. Madame, you discovered the body. Pray tell us what you recall. Her voice trembled as she spoke, yet her eyes remained alert. It was after the first alarm, the hush, you know, she stammered. I peeked around the doorframe to see if anyone needed assistance. I saw Mr. Marsh sitting motionless, and that terrible feather in his hand. I screamed, and then Sir Reginald arrived. She paused, swallowing. I did not enter further. I did not wish to touch anything. Poirot nodded. Your restraint was admirable, but I must ask, upon seeing the feather, did you notice anything unusual about it? A mark, a smudge, anything? Lady Edith shook her head, confusion clouding her features. No, monsieur. Only the horror of blood upon that delicate plume. He turned to Sir Charles. Sir Charles Wainwright, you paced the corridor when I examined the display case. You bore the appearance of someone who had urgent business to attend. Sir Charles, a tall man with silver hair and keen blue eyes, folded his arms. I did indeed step away, he replied evenly. I needed a moment's solitude to comprehend what had occurred. I had been in conversation with Mr. Marsh earlier regarding a prospective donation to the museum. We were to finalize terms tonight. He glanced down at his polished shoes. When I heard the scream, I rushed back. I saw Lady Edith by the threshold and helped to clear the corridor. Monsieur Poirot said, you had access to Marsh's office records, did you not? Sir Charles inclined his head subtly. I did. As a trustee of Sir Reginald's collection, I review acquisitions and valuations. He met Poirot's gaze unwaveringly. But I swear I did not harm him. Poirot's moustache twitched. We shall see. He then beckoned Mr. Thornhill forward. The agent, a slender man with rimless spectacles, adjusted his tie with an air of mild impatience. Mr. Thornhill, Poirot said, you represent Lucille Venier, the painter of our feather in question. Her works command great price and secret admirers. Thornhill's lips tightened. Indeed, Miss Venier's reputation is her supreme asset. I arrived tonight to facilitate the sale of a second piece of Bird of Paradise painting commissioned by Sir Reginald. I did not expect such dramatic association with our feather. He gave a polite bow. I had little interaction with Edward Marsh, though I am aware he catalogued her works. Ah, Poirot murmured. And when did you last see Mr. Marsh? Thornhill hesitated. Before dinner, in the hallway. He asked about final restoration details. I directed him to my room upstairs to retrieve some notes. That was at roughly 8:45 p.m. Poirot scribbled in his notebook, "Thank you." "Now, Miss Clementine Blanchard." The young woman curtsied, her dark curls bouncing. Clementine Poirot continued in a gentler tone, "You and Edward Marsh were close, were you not?" Her cheeks flushed. "Yes, Monsieur Dot, he was my tutor and a dear friend." "I cannot believe someone would wish him harm." She paused, hands clasped. "I saw him this afternoon, helping me with a letter to my grandmother. He seemed preoccupied, though repeatedly he glanced at that feather. Was he worried?" Poirot pressed Miss Clementine's side. "I think he suspected something odd about it, something beyond mere artistry. He mumbled about code and pigment, but I thought him being overly imaginative." "Interesting," Poirot said. "And you have nowhere to hide your anxiety. Very good." He then turned to Miss Fane, who had observed silently, lips pursed in professional appraisal. "Miss Fane," he said softly, "you have examined hundreds of paintings. Tell us your honest impression of the Plume de Cygne. What does such a piece convey to you?" The critic let out a soft breath. "To me," she began, "it is a masterpiece of illusion. Veneer captured motion in stillness, yet I sensed something ostentatious in almost desperate display of skill. Why paint a single feather in such detail if not to draw attention from something lacking in substance?" She arched an eyebrow. "Perhaps, monsieur, you see why I might envy Miss V." A ripple passed over the group. Poirot merely smiled. "Envy is the greediest of motives, is it not? But I thank you for your candor." He closed his notebook. "Now," he said, "these 6 accounts, while varied, share a common fact. Each of you interacted with the feather, the booklet, or Mr. Marsh tonight. Yet only one of you holds the key to this riddle." He tipped his head, considering them all. "I will request that each of you remain available for further questioning, and that none of you leave this estate until the mystery is solved. Moreover, I shall require access to Miss Vigne's studio records and Sir Reginald's visitor log." Sir Reginald nodded in acquiescence. Lady Edith patted her wrist where a small brooch fell silent. Miss Clementine bit her lip. Sir Charles's eyes flicked toward his cufflinks. Thornhill's expression grew guarded. Mrs. Cartwright simply inhaled and exhaled, her calm facade faltering only in the slightest of tremors. As Poirot moved at the window, staring outward toward the moonlit gardens, I felt the tension in the room thicken. These were not mere witnesses. Each was a player in a subtle drama of concealment and ambition. And though none had confessed, in their glances and gestures lay the seeds of confession. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but unyielding. "Tonight, the little grey cells will require nourishment. I suggest we retire until dawn, for fresh eyes illuminate fresh truths. Tomorrow we begin anew with interviews, with examinations, with revelations." He paused, letting the word hang. "Until then, reflect on your own actions this evening. Remember, mon ami, that the greatest lies are often told in silence." And with that, he turned and departed toward the library once more, leaving us to our thoughts and to the shadows that danced at the edges of the candlelight. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. The first light of dawn crept into Sir Reginald Blanchard's drawing-room as I descended the curved staircase, still shrouded in the dusky promise of morning. I confess I approached the room with a mixture of anticipation and unease. Anticipation for the arrival of my friend Hercule Poirot. Unease for the night's accumulated anxieties that loomed in every corner of the house. As I entered the salon, I found the guests assembled as instructed, each cast in the pale glow of oil lamps, their faces wearied by suspense. There, standing, with his back to the mantel, was Poirot himself, immaculate as ever, his grey greatcoat draped over a mahogany chair. He surveyed the room with a small smile playing across his lips, his moustache twitching in contentment. Upon seeing me, he turned and inclined his head in greeting. "Ah, mon ami Hastings," he whispered, voice smooth as polished marble. "Today, the little grey cells shall feast on truth." I closed the door softly behind me. "They have been hungry since last night," I replied, offering him a sea-trather, unnecessary for a man of his stature and minimal constitution. He placed a gloved hand on the back of the chair but did not sit. Instead, he proceeded to walk the perimeter of the room, pausing before each guest as though each were a painting to be examined in silence. First, he regarded Lady Edith Blanchard, who sat near a velvet settee, her hands clasped in her lap. "Madame," Poirot said, eyeing the white lace at her throat, "you appear pale, yet your hands tremble not. Such composure under duress is admirable. Yet I sense you hide fear beneath that veneer of calm." He nodded once, as if satisfied, and moved on. Lady Edith swallowed, glancing at the silk drapes that shielded the windows from the cold morning air. I did what I could to remain steady," she murmured. Poirot's gaze shifted upward, and "Yet you stood closest to the feather itself when you discovered the body. A delicate object, is it not? One might break a bristle by turning too hastily." He offered a small, knowing smile before turning to Sir Charles Wainwright. Sir Charles straightened, shoulders squared. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, curtly. Sir Charles Poirot replied, examining the cuff of his evening jacket. "I note the crease here freshly pressed, aligned with sartorial exactness. A man who values order. Yet last night you confessed to pacing disruption for a man of habit. May I ask why?" Sir Charles's eyes flickered. I needed to collect my thoughts. Poirot tapped the cuff lightly with a forefinger, and yet it was near the study door where Marsh fell. "I shall return to that moment presently." He pivoted elegantly, his coat-tails sweeping the rug, to regard Mr. Garrick Thornhill. Thornhill adjusted his spectacles. Monsieur Thornhill," Poirot said, leaning closer. "Your hands bear faint stains, brownish, as though you've recently handled earth or clay." He paused, watching Thornhill's pale fingers. "Yet you profess to have come only to discuss a painting air commission." "Yes." Thornhill glanced at his cuffs, feigning ignorance. I might have examined some frames in the gallery." Monsieur Poirot nodded. "Frame dust will settle upon the hands. But you studied the botanical watercolours upstairs, Merolde, green pigment, matching that found on the feather's broken bristle." He turned, as though dismissing Thornhill's protest. "But more pressing is the missing booklet." I watched Poirot's eyes as they swept across the assembled six. "This booklet," he said, "contains reproductions of the very art we admire. It is small, easily misplaced, yet invaluable if one wished to conceal a clue. Only 3 were found. The 4th remains with our murderer. A hush fell. Miss Clementine Blanchard shifted in her seat, her fingertips white upon the edging of her skirt. I gave Marsh my copy for safekeeping, she confessed. He was to seal it in the safe upstairs. And yet it is not in the safe, Poirot said quietly, which suggests the murderer had access to it after Marsh deposited the book. Before the tragic event, he turned to Miss Rosalind Fane. Miss Fane, you claimed that the feather's artistry concealed desperation, yet you remained silent on the reproduction itself. Do you admit to studying those plates more closely than a casual observer? Miss Fane's lips pressed together. I glanced at my brochure earlier, monsieur, to assess colour fidelity. Beyond that, nothing, indeed. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Colour fidelity, the very crux of this affair. He paused, raising one hand. Mies chers Amos, let me be clear. Last night's murder was no impulsive act. It was carefully orchestrated, laden with symbolism, and executed with practiced precision. The feather, the booklet, the missing pages all speak of a puzzle designed to confound. He lowered his hand and addressed us all. Yet I also observed the house tonight. Candles guttered in odd corners, footprints in the study hearth. And forgive the vulgar term, sweatstands under the door handle. He pointed to Mrs. Cartwright, who sat erect with surprising stoicism. Mrs. Cartwright, Poirot said, you guard this house and its secrets. You witnessed our disturbance. Pray, what did you notice when you first heard Lady Edith's scream? Mrs. Cartwright swallowed, her knuckles whitening. I ran to the library entrance and saw Sir Charles standing over the body. He hastily stepped back when he noticed me. Her eyes flickered to Sir Charles, who returned her gaze without shame. Pertinent observation, Poirot said, arching an eyebrow. Sir Charles, care to explain why you delayed your entrance into the library, despite your key granting you immediate access? Sir Charles inhaled. I feared, madame, a scene of horror. Ah, fear, Poirot intoned. An emotion that prompts one to pause, especially for a man of order. I felt the tension coil in Sir Charles's jaw. I could not bear the sight. For one moment, you were absent from a crisis you later claimed to face alone. Poirot smiled thinly. A critical discrepancy, Sir Charles. He turned away to gaze at the portrait of Lady Blanchard's great-grandmother, then back at us. Now, I shall retire briefly to review my notes. I will return shortly to question each of you in detail. When I do, I ask for your frankest recollections, no matter how trivial they may seem. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot bowed once more. Until then, I implore you, observe your fellow suspects. Each slip, each glance, each hesitation may reveal what the murderer would conceal. He swept from the room, leaving a charged hush in his wake. We sat in stiff silence, the enormity of his words hanging like a spectre among us. Outside, the first rays of sun touched the winter-bare branches of the Blanchard estate's ancient oaks, as though nature itself awaited the resolution of this dark puzzle. And so I set aside my own thoughts, preparing to assist Poirot in the interviews to come, knowing that with each interrogation we would peel back another layer of deception, until at last the truth lay bare beneath. The painted swan feathers haunting enigma. Chapter 5. Initial interviews. The dawn had scarcely broken when Monsieur summoned me to the library for our first round of interviews. The polished oak table was strewn with freshly made tea, biscuits, and a small stack of tablets for note-taking. The morning light slanted through tall windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced like silent witnesses to last night's grim tableau. Across from us sat the first of our 6 principal suspects, Lady Edith Blanchard. Madame, began Poirot, his voice as smooth as linen, let us review your movements this evening, from the moment you arrived until the tragic discovery. He placed a slender notebook before him, opening to a blank page. I ask that you speak candidly. Remember, the smallest detail, idle gesture, a glance, even a pause, may hold great significance. Lady Edith took a steadying breath. Her fine lace collar trembled slightly. Very well, monsieur. I arrived promptly at 8 o'clock, as did all the guests. I greeted Mr. Marsh beside the display case. He complimented me on my brooch, which was a family heirloom. We spoke briefly. Then I joined Miss Clementine and Mr. Thornhill in the drawing-room. Poirot nodded. And the feather booklet, did you receive yours immediately? She glanced at a ribbon-bound reproduction at her side. Yes, but at 9:10, I misplaced mine. I looked for it in my evening bag, then on the settee, then asked Mrs. Cartwright if she had seen it. Her gaze flicked toward the footman standing just outside the door. She offered her copy for reference. I interjected softly, Madame, you did not mention speaking with Sir Charles in the hallway. Her eyes widened. I did stop to say good evening to Sir Charles near the corridor by the library. He seemed distracted. She paused. He said he wished to finalize his notes with Marsh regarding the museum endowment. I left them speaking together. Poirot jotted a note. And did you observe anything unusual about Sir Charles's demeanor, Lady? Edith nodded. He looked startled. His hand shook when he picked up the booklet. She shivered, recalling the moment. I thought him merely nervous about our conversation. Poirot closed his notebook. Thank you, Madame. That will suffice for now. Lady Edith rose, relief mingled with apprehension on her face as she left the room. Poirot poured himself a cup of tea, swirling the steam gently. Hastings, notice how she searched for the booklet, yet neglected to mention that she handed her copy to Mrs. Cartwright, an omission that suggests she feared scrutiny of her own copy. I glanced at the departing figure. She may have been testing to see if her booklet bore anything incriminating. Exactly, Poirot said, sipping his tea. Now Sir Charles Wainwright. Sir Charles entered briskly, nodding to the footman. He sat with exemplary posture, gingerly placing his notebook and pen before him. Sir Charles, Poirot began, you and Mr. Marsh discussed the museum donation. You claimed you gave your booklet to Marsh for safekeeping. At what time did this occur? Sir Charles consulted his pocket watch. Around 9:25 p.m., Monsieur Marsh accepted it, promising to return it once he'd confirmed the painting's provenance. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Yet Lady Edith said she saw you discussing with Marsh near the booklet table at approximately 9:15. Sir Charles's gaze flicked to mine. He cleared his throat. Perhaps my recollection is imprecise. Poirot folded his hands. Memory, under stress, can be fallible. But the household ledger records Marsh unlocking the display case at 10:37 and the study door at 10:42. If you entrusted him with your booklet at 9:25, why did he handle the case again at 10:37? Did he remove your booklet then? Sir Charles hesitated. He may have retrieved it. He swallowed, but I did not ask. Curious, Poirot said. You had significant vested interest in the museum commission. Might that interest have motivated you to ensure a particular detail remained confidential? Sir Charles looked away. I would never harm Marsh. Perhaps not, Poirot replied, but you might manipulate information. He tapped the table. We shall return to this question now, Monsieur Thornhill. Thornhill entered, removing his gloves with a precise flourish, setting them on the table like a surgeon laying down instruments. Mr. Thornhill, Poirot said, you professed to have come merely to negotiate a commission, yet you handled the botanical watercolors earlier this evening. Did you study the feather reproduction in detail? Thornhill's breath quickened. I inspected the booklet, yes, but only to compare color fidelity. I admired the feather's violet sheen. He paused. My agents worldwide demand perfection. Poirot leaned forward. Indeed, yet your fingerprints were found on the display case's glass on the side opposite the open latch. You had no apparent reason to touch it. Lips thinned. I may have steadied myself against the case when discussing the feather with Lady Edith. Poirot studied him for a long moment, but none recalls such a discussion. He tapped his notebook, and the violet smudge on the hinge paint from the feather bears your pigment hue, does it not? One wonders whether you sought to leave your own mark. Thornhill paled. I would never then. Why defend the colour so vigorously? Poirot stood, signalling the end of the interview. We shall speak again. Thornhill excreted a sharp breath and left, shoulders stooped, as if bearing a weight. Next came Miss Clementine Blanchard. She entered without hesitation, a juvenile resolve in her eyes. Settling onto a chair, she clasped her hands in her lap. Miss Clementine, Poirot said, you entrusted your booklet to Marsh for sealing in the safe, yet it remains missing. Why was your memorabilia more valuable than others? Her lips trembled. He offered to guard it. It contained a personal letter I had written. I feared anyone might read it. Poirot nodded. And the letter does. It referenced the feather or its secret. Miss Clementine shook her head. Only my gratitude for his guidance, nothing of mysteries. H.M. Poirot tapped his pencil. And at what moment did you leave Marsh? You said you departed for tea. She glanced away. I went to the conservatory at 10 p.m. Mine needed a breath of air, and you encountered Mrs. Cartwright there. Poirot prodded. She inhaled. Yes, she admitted. She brought me the tea. I remained until Lady Edith's scream. Did you see anyone else in the conservatory? Poirot asked. She paused. I thought I saw Sir Charles slip between the columns. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I leaned forward. Which columns? She pointed to a sketch of the folly in the garden. Poirot's eyes brightened. Thank you, my dear. That will greatly assist. She nodded, standing. I hope it helps. Miss Rosalind Fane was the last to be interviewed. Her steps were measured as she approached, resting her hands upon the table's edge. Miss Fane, Poirot said, you are known for your critical. You claimed to judge the feather's artistry as desperate. What did you hope to gain by such an assessment? She arched an eyebrow. My reputation, monsieur. A critic must speak truthfully, regardless of friendship or favour. Yet, you handled the booklet more than once, Poirot observed, and your notebook contains a sketch of the feather down to each delicate barb. She drew in a breath. I sketched a capture technique, nothing more. Poirot studied her reflection in the window glass. Technique is power, power to expose, power to conceal. You understand this intimately. Miss Fane's composure flickered. Monsieur, I am no criminal. Perhaps not, Poirot replied, rising. But your knowledge of pigment and brushstroke rivals that of Miss Venia herself. That knowledge grants one the means to fabricate evidence or to distort truth. She bristled, then turned away. I trust you will clear my name swiftly. With that, she departed. Poirot folded his notebook and gazed at the empty chairs. "Hastings," he said, "each interview has revealed omissions, hesitations, and contradictions. Yet no one confessed intent. The murderer remains hidden among them. In our next phase, we shall test alibis, examine evidence anew, and observe reactions under pressure." He blew out a slow breath. "Now, we must allow our suspects time to reflect on their own statements. Often, when one believes a lie has succeeded, it will emerge unbidden in a careless word." I arose. "Shall we dine, then? Even the little grey cells require sustenance." Poirot smiled. "Indeed, Hastings provision for body and mind, but keep your eyes sharp, for tonight the final game begins." And with that, we left the library, the morning's interviews etched upon our minds, the trail of clues winding ever more tightly toward a resolution shrouded in painted feathers and hidden motives. Chapter 6. The first. False led late that afternoon. As golden light pooled across the library's polished floor, Monsieur Poirot beckoned me back to his side with a look of stern expectancy. We had just concluded our midday repast, solemn sandwiches and modest pastries consumed in silence, when he revealed the next phase of his inquiry, following the trail of the missing booklet and its secret, even if that trail led us astray. "Hastings," he said, smoothing his moustache, "we must examine anew the supposed confession of evidence. Only then shall the true culprit's deception stand naked." He led me past the drawing-room and out into the winter garden, long conservatory, ablaze with late-blooming camellias and the heady scent of jasmine. The glass roof burned with afternoon sun, yet a chill lingered in the corners, as if memory itself had grown cold here. At a rotillon table, Poirot produced a small, leather-bound notebook, one of his own, its pages annotated with scrupulous care. "Observe," he murmured, flipping to the 6th page. "Here, an entry by Mrs. Cartwright, noting that Miss Clementine returned shortly after 10 past 10 with a damp handkerchief." He pointed to a tidy line of script. "She claimed to have extinguished a small fire in one of the greenhouse's braziers. But note the timing. Lady Edith's scream came at precisely 10:52, which means Clementine had the time and motive to slip away, remove her booklet from the safe, and frame another." I frowned. "You believe she set the fire as a distraction? Might one not do so?" Poirot asked. "Imagine a small flame mentioned only in hushed tones, drawing Mrs. Cartwright and perhaps Sir Charles into the conservatory, leaving the study unsupervised." I recalled Mrs. Cartwright's earlier account. She said she rushed to the library, passing Clementine in the corridor, but under the pretext of investigating smoke. Poirot said, tapping the entry, "A neat diversion. We retraced our steps along the conservatory path, pausing at a bronze brazier engraved with floral motifs. Tiny wisps of ash clung to its rim. Poirot knelt, his keen eyes narrowing. The ash is of camellia woodrare for a brazier intended for heat. One would use charcoal or coal briquettes. Yet here, a handful of petals has been burned. See how the ashes shimmer with crimson dye likely from Clementine's gown." I knelt beside him, running a fingertip through the ashen residue. Indeed, there was a trace of burgundy pigment mixed among the grey. "She wore a crimson silk dress at dinner," I observed, "but she said her handkerchief grew damp from wiping soot off a coal fire." Poirot stood, offering his hand. "A convenient lie, mon ami. But note our false lead. If investigators follow this clue, they will suspect Clementine exclusively. Yet the evidence was planted." I straightened. By whom? Poirot's little eyes twinkled. Our murderer, seeking to divert attention from the true hiding place of the booklet. But let us test the hypothesis with Sir Charles. We returned indoors and found Sir Charles near the fireplace, perusing his notes once more. Poirot approached him with an air of casual inquiry. "Sir Charles, may I trouble you to accompany me to the greenhouse? A question of horticultural safety, you understand." Sir Charles looked puzzled, but consented, and we retraced the path. Poirot paused beside the brazier. "Sir Charles," he said softly, "did you observe any unusual smoke during the evening?" Sir Charles peered at the brazier, startled. "Smoke? I thought it was just a spring burning for ambience. I paid it little mind." He furrowed his brow. "Is something amiss?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied, "but tell me, you passed this way at 10:15, did you not?" Sir Charles's eyes widened. "I did to clear my head. I felt unsettled by the discussion with Marsh." He inhaled. "I recall a faint odour, yes, but I assumed it was incense." "Incense scented with camellia petals," Poirot said, lifting a petal from the ash. "A rare, expensive fragrance, one that would be used by an artist or collector." He handed the petal to Sir Charles. "Are you familiar with such a scent?" Sir Charles shook his head. "No, I never encountered it." Poirot pocketed the petal. "Curious. So if you did not light this brazier, nor did Miss Clementine, who told us she did, then who?" Sir Charles swallowed. I cannot say." Poirot placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Relax, mon ami. We test all hypotheses. Yet this clue leads nowhere unless someone else orchestrated it." He turned to me. "Hastings, do you recall Mr. Thornhill's claim that he inspected the botanical watercolours?" I nodded. "Yes, he said he handled Vignier's earlier studies of exotic birds." "Indeed," Poirot said. "He had access to the greenhouse, for Vignir required plant specimens for her reference. A logical excuse to enter." He flicked his eyes to the surviving petals. "One might burn a few leaves afterward to conceal one's passage." Sir Charles blinked. "So you suspect Thornhill?" Poirot inclined his head. "He provided the palette the pigment for the green smearand had motive to divert our attention onto Miss Clementine. Yet he is but one possible architect." He stepped aside, allowing the light to settle on the brazier's ashen remnants. "The true value of this false lead is that it highlights who benefits from misdirection." I considered his words. Clementine would be the obvious suspect, but the brazier's odd fuel suggests an outsider's involvement. "Precisely," Poirot said, returning to the house. "We shall confront Thornhill next, press him on his greenhouse visits. But first, Hastings, we examine the safe." In Sir Reginald's study, a vault door stood ajar. Inside lay the catalogues and reproductions minus Clementine's booklet. Poirot knelt, examining the lock. "A muffled key turn," he murmured. "No sign of forced entry. Only someone with knowledge of this vault could open it." I recognized the design and Art Deco mechanism that required both a key and a precise torque. "Sir Reginald taught me how once," I said. "It is sensitive to pressure, and Poirot pried a fallen page from beneath the safe's carpet. It was a page torn from a reproduction, showing the feather painted in a different hue. Beneath it, a hastily scrawled note: "Look beneath the painted truth." He held the page aloft. A message from the murderer intended to draw our eyes away from the real hiding place. He tucked it into his notebook. "Now, Hastings, the first false lead has served its purpose, to lure suspicion to Clementine and to test Thornhill's statements. Our next step, observe their reactions when confronted. He stood, his stature imperious despite its patent delicacy. Let us prepare our next interrogation. For a trap is best laid after one allows the quarry to rest a moment. And rest they may not. I followed him to the door, heart pounding with the promise of unfolding revelations and with the certainty that our suspect was watching, waiting, and perhaps smiling at how elegantly the scene was being manipulated. Yet, if anyone could outmaneuver Poirot's little grey cells, I dared not imagine who it might be. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game that evening. The Blanchard drawing-room took on the air of a carefully arranged stage, its plush settees and gilt mirrors reflecting a tension more palpable than any chandelier's glow. Monsieur Poirot had instructed that the suspects return at 8 o'clock sharp, and each had complied with varying degrees of apprehension. The previous day's interviews had frayed nerves. Tonight, Poirot intended to test them further, laying verbal traps designed to provoke the slightest tremor of guilt. I took my place discreetly at the back of the room as Poirot stood before the assembled six, his posture measured and assured. He carried nothing but his own keen intellect, yet even without notes, one could almost sense the calculations turning behind his bright eyes. "Mes amis," he began, his voice calm, "last night we examined actions and alibis. Tonight we examine character. For a murderer's heart beats erratically when pressed by truth." He nodded toward Lady Edith Blanchard, who had taken the centre seat, her gaze fixed on the oriental rug. "Madame, you recalled giving your booklet to Mrs. Cartwright after misplacing it. Yet you observed Sir Charles receiving yours earlier. Let us explore that moment anew." Poirot's eyes were gentle but insistent. "Tell me, what did you see on Sir Charles's face when he opened your booklet?" Lady Edith's cheeks flushed. I thought he looked surprised. Then he seemed relieved." She paused, fingers twisting in her lap. "But I did not think it meant anything." "Relief, yes," Poirot said softly. "Relief at finding what he sought, or relief at passing off suspicion." He tapped a finger against his lips as if tasting her reaction. "Did you notice any phrase or margin note that lingered upon his expression?" She swallowed. "No, I did not read the page closely. I was distracted by his reaction." "Distracted," Poirot echoed. "Indeed, curiosity and distraction walk hand in hand. But the murderer must focus would not miss the opportunity to ensure that particular booklet never saw daylight." He paused, letting the implication hang. Lady Edith glanced away, brow furrowed. Poirot turned to Sir Charles Wainwright. "Sir Charles, you claimed to hand your booklet to Mr. Marsh at 9:25 p.m., yet Lady Edith observed your relief at finding hers. Tell us, what did you seek in Marsh's hands that you did not wish others to see?" Sir Charles stiffened. His overcoat's shoulder brushed the wallpaper. He swallowed. "I sought only confirmation of authenticity. Marsh was to verify a watermark Henderson and Sons used decades ago." "A watermark," Poirot repeated, "a secret known to few. Yet you did not request Miss Clementine's copy, nor Miss Fane's only, Lady Edith's. Why did that particular booklet matter?" Sir Charles's gaze flicked toward Lady Edith, whose fingers had stilled. I cannot recall exactly." Poirot inclined his head. "Memory, under question, often falters. Now, Mr. Thornhill." He stepped toward the agent, whose pale face betrayed impatience. "Mr. Thornhill," Poirot said, "you profess to champion Miss Venier's reputation. Yet, when pressed about the emerald green pigment on the feather's bristle, you grew defensive. Permit me a simple question. Did you ever deviate from the published palette in any of your commissions? Thornhill's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, then closed it, shrugging. I suggested color enhancements. Yes, but only at the patron's request. Enhancements, Poirot mused. Subtle changes, greens made more vivid, violets more profound. If one wished to replicate the pigment found on the swan feather's bristle, one would know precisely where to find it. He held Thornhill's gaze. You learned that hue in Vinier's studio? No. Thornhill's cheeks colored. Perhaps I observed her mixes, but I did not handle the booklets. After you sealed them. And yet, Poirot said, sliding a reproduction across the table, your glove prints were found here on the margins of this very page. He motioned to the edges of the plate depicting the feather. Explain. That. Thornhill inhaled sharply. I was checking for print quality. The publisher's batch had a misalignment. I touched the plate to assess ink depth. Poirot's eyes lit. A misalignment, one that would not disturb the text, only the color layers. Curious that you found fault in the reproduction when your motive lay elsewhere. He stepped back, hands clasped. Thornhill's facade, Quivered. Next. Poirot turned to Miss Clementine Blanchard, who stood close to the mullioned windows, framed in moonlight. Miss Clementine, he said, you confessed to burning petals to mask your passage. Yet why plant evidence in the greenhouse rather than in the safe itself? She swallowed, voice quavering. I thought the safe too conspicuous. A brazier who would suspect a girl carrying a handkerchief. Ah, Poirot said, tilting his head. And what of the note beneath the safer torn page with the words, "Look beneath the painted truth"? He produced the scrap, holding it aloft, that was found in your handwriting. Miss Clementine shook her head vehemently. No, I found that page by the brazier, beneath ashes. Tears glimmered. I thought someone had mocked me. Mocked. You, Poirot repeated, or sought to implicate you. He studied her tear-streaked face. You wished to protect someone. Her head drooped. I cannot say. A hush fell. Poirot's manner shifted, gentler, almost sympathetic. Mon enfant. The mind under duress will cling to a secret to shield another. Remember that in our next inquiry, he stepped aside, overlooking Mrs. Cartwright, who had remained silent throughout. Mrs. Cartwright, Poirot said, you guard this household's every key and every confidence. Yet Marsh's unreturned booklet suggests you might have facilitated its removal. Did you see who accessed the safe after Marsh? Mrs. Cartwright's calm broke for the first time. She inhaled, trembling. I saw Sir Charles's key in the lock, but I also saw Thornhill's silhouette at the window. Her gaze flickered. Between them, I did not stop him. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. So our suspects cross paths in shadows. You were torn between loyalty and duty. He turned to Miss Rosalind Fane, who perched on the settee's corner. Miss Fane, you sketched the feather, you judged its desperation. Yet when you saw the feather with blood, you remained still. Why did you not speak up? Miss Fane's lips pursed. I assumed it was part of the exhibit's drama. Her voice wavered. I never expected actual violence. Drama, Poirot echoed. Life and art intertwined. But you more than any understand the power of staging. You know how a well-placed red smear commands attention. She bit her lip, looking away. I did not plan a murder, monsieur. It does not escape me, Poirot said softly. But there is one who delights in turning life into spectacle. He raised his hand. mes amis, our next interrogations, will find the culprit in his own reflections. For when one watches oneself too keenly, one forgets the eyes that watch back. He bowed slightly, signaling the end of the psychological games. The suspects shifted in their seats, some pale, some defiant. I stepped forward as Poirot gathered his notes. Now, he said, quietly, we rest until tomorrow's round. Tonight, reflect on your responses, for in the silence of your thoughts lies the truth I seek. As we departed, I glanced back at the suspects. The air trembled with half-spoken truths and veiled intentions, and I knew, beyond doubt, that the real game had only just begun. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery night had fallen again when the crisis that would become our secondary mystery unfolded. I was in the conservatory, helping Mrs. Cartwright gather a selection of camellia cuttings. Monsieur Poirot believed we might find another clue among their petals, when a sudden cry rang through the glass halls. The sound was not the elegant scream of Lady Edith, nor the controlled gasp of a startled guest. Rather, it was a strangled, urgent call. Poison. He's been poisoned. Poirot appeared beside me in an instant, tall and alert, his little grey cells already spinning. We hastened back through the moonlit corridors toward the source. Sir Reginald's private study. As we entered, a scene of pandemonium greeted us. Sir Charles Wainwright lay slumped across the antique desk, his face ashen, one hand pressed to his throat. Nearby, a crystal decanter stood overturned, its condenser, pale amber liquid, seeping into the oriental rug. Lady Edith knelt at his side, her white gloves stained with the spilled fluid. Mrs. Cartwright hovered, handkerchief pressed to Sir Charles's lips, her expression a mixture of horror and apology. Quick, Hastings, Poirot commanded, voice calm but urgent. Bring water and fetch the small vial from my coat pocket. I obeyed, running to retrieve a carafe of spring water and to rummage through Poirot's coat, where he carried a discreet antidote for emergencies. The household doctor, Dr. Ellis, arrived moments later, summoned by the footman's frantic knock. But the antidote would buy critical minutes. Sir Charles's eyes fluttered open as the doctor administered a gentle injection. Poison, it seemed, had been slipped into his brandy-precise dose, just enough to incapacitate but not immediately kill. As he lay semi-conscious, his breathing shallow yet steady, Poirot knelt beside him, keen eyes studying the decanter, the half-empty glass on the desk, and the spilled liquid that glimmered in the lamplight. Observe, Hastings, he whispered. The brandy bears no sediment, yet this liquid has flecks of powdered residue. He dipped a fingertip into the pool and held it to the light. Tiny green crystals, identical to the pigment found on the feather's broken bristle. His brow furrowed. Someone has used that pigment as a poison carrier, disguising it within the amber hue. A dramatic flourish, yet unmistakable once one knows what to look for. I shuddered. So the same person who smeared the feather now. Poisons, Sir Charles, but why target him? Poirot's eyes darted around the study. Perhaps because he possessed knowledge critical to the mystery, the location of that missing booklet. Perhaps, or the safe's combination, or perhaps too, frighten the others, to suggest that no one is safe until the secret is revealed. He rose, motioning to Dr. Ellis to follow him as he inspected the crystal glass. Notice how the lip bears a faint fingerprint, smudged, but present. It belongs to someone who handles delicate objects often. Dr. Ellis leaned in, removing his spectacles. I can confirm this glass, like Marsh's letter opener, shows marks consistent with repeated handling. Someone practiced with it. He frowned. But who among us sips brandy so ceremoniously that they leave such prints? Poirot nodded. A question for later. Now, Hastings, accompany me to the drawing-room. We must secure the study and question those who had access. I helped guide Sir Charles to a side chair, where he sat trembling but conscious, eyes glazed with residual confusion. Lady Edith dabbed his forehead. His first words were a hoarse, "Who would do this?" "He will." "Answer soon," Poirot said quietly. "But first, we prevent another attempt." He locked the study door behind him and motioned for Mrs. Cartwright to allow only him or me to enter henceforth in the drawing-room. The guests assembled once more. Lucille Venier's agent, Mr. Thornhill, Miss Clementine Blanchard, Miss Rosalind Fane, and Lady Edith, who now looked more fragile than ever. Each bore expressions of shocksome genuine, some expertly maintained. Poirot surveyed them with steely precision. "Miss Amos," he began, voice measured, "we have just witnessed a second deliberate act of violence, the attempted poisoning of Sir Charles. The poison bore the same pigment as found on the feather. The killer seeks to escalate the stakes, to ensure cooperation through fear." He paused, eyes lingering on each in turn. "I must ask, who among you departed this room after dinner to procure medicine or wine? Who had opportunity to tamper with Sir Charles's glass?" His gaze settled on Mrs. Cartwright, who had been serving refreshments. She rose, lips trembling. "Monsieur, I fetched brandy upon Sir Charles's request. He alone chose to drink it." She bowed her head. "I would never harm him." "No, madame," Poirot said softly. "Your loyalty is unquestioned. Yet someone else might have offered him that brandy, persuading him to drink." He turned to Mr. Thornhill. "You professed to have no interest in the liquor cabinet, yet you have keys to both here and in the gallery. Did you fetch brandy this evening?" Thornhill's face paled. No, I did not." Poirot's moustache quivered. "Your agent's pass grants you access to the cellar, but a poisoned glass was left at the desk where he never sits. Curious choice of location if you wished a swift result." He then looked to Miss Clementine. "And you, mademoiselle, where were you when Sir Charles drank?" Miss Clementine shook her head. "I was in the conservatory, writing letters by lamplight. I had no reason to visit the study again." Poirot nodded. "Your alibi is supported by Mrs. Cartwright, who saw you entering here." He addressed Miss Fane last. "Miss Fane, you observed Sir Charles during our interviews. Did you ever taste his brandy?" Miss Fane's lips curled. "I cannot abide spirits, monsieur," Poirot inhaled. "A pity. Yet you handled these glass tumblers in the cabinet earlier to demonstrate their cut and clarity to a client." He pointed to a side table. "Only one glass remains untouched, Sir Charles's, which had been replaced after his collapse." A murmur ran through the room. Poirot raised his hand. "We shall take each glass for analysis at dawn. Meanwhile, I request that each of you rest here under supervision, for tonight the poisoner walks among us and, I suspect, anticipates further chaos." He paused, regarding us all with a grave calm. "This secondary mystery is more than a diversion. It is a message. The murderer warns us, reveal the truth, or more will suffer." He turned to me. "Hastings, ready the morning light. Tomorrow we expose a killer who thinks in pigment and blood." As we moved toward the study door, I caught sight of Sir Charles's trembling hand gripping the decanter's stopper. Though he had been the victim, he too seemed a suspect in this escalating drama. and I knew that under Poirot's patient scrutiny, every gesture, no matter how small, would be laid bare until the culprit's identity emerged from shadow and smear alike. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The morning sun filtered through frost-lined windows as Monsieur Poirot gathered us once more in Sir Reginald's drawing-room. The events of the previous night murder, misdirection, and near poisoning hung over us like storm clouds. Yet now the little grey cells required serenity. 4 truths often emerge when one's heart is still. As the guests assembled, I observed them anew, noting the subtle tensions that bound them together. Monsieur Poirot looked up from his desk, where he had arranged the recovered evidence, the green pigmented feather fragment, the torn booklet page, inscribed with look beneath the painted truth, and, most tellingly, an assortment of crystal glasses from the study's liquor cabinet. He addressed us with gentle gravity. Mies Amos, we have reviewed actions and motivations. Now, we must explore the ties that bind you, hidden connections that explain opportunity and motive alike. He motioned toward Lady Edith Blanchard, who sat stiffly on the velvet settee, her knitting needles idle in her lap. Madame, you and Sir Charles have collaborated in philanthropic ventures before, have you not? The museum endowment, and more recently an art scholarship in Marsh's name. Lady Edith's eyes widened. I assisted Sir Charles with applications last winter. He wished to honour Edward's memory. Poirot inclined his head. And you were seen together in his gallery 2 days ago, inspecting Vinier's botanical series. He glanced at Mr. Thornhill, whose lips had tightened. Mr. Thornhill facilitated that viewing, correct? Thornhill adjusted his tie. Yes. I arranged a private showing for Sir Charles and Lady Edith. They requested exclusive access. Exclusive indeed, Poirot murmured. Yet you claim no involvement in the poisoning. He tapped a sheet of paper documenting Thornhill's travel train tickets between Cannes and London. You arrived last night, after your agent duties in Manchester, yet you provided Miss Fane with your carriage for her journey home, did you not? Miss Rosalind Fane flushed at the implication. He offered to drive me when he heard the roads were icy. I accepted, naturally. Poirot turned to her, a generous offer, yet peculiar. You live in Bloomsbury, Miss Fane, quite distant. Why accept such assistance unless you wished to avoid public scrutiny? She bit her lip. I preferred to arrive safely in the dark. Safety, Poirot repeated softly, and proximity to others. He paused, then beckoned Mrs. Cartwright forward. The gentlewoman of the household's calm composure had cracked under stress, revealing a flicker of secret knowledge. Madame Poirot said, You have faithfully served the Blanchard family for years, yet I discovered in the study's ledger a notation you made 2 weeks ago. C. Blanchard, private meeting, 11 p.m. Care to explain? Mrs. Cartwright's hands shook as she retrieved the ledger, leafing to the entry. Miss Clementine requested confidentiality, Monsieur Chasseur. She said she had personal matters to discuss with Marsh, matters of family. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Family matters? And yet your records omit the topic. What did Miss Clementine and Mr. Marsh discuss? She inhaled. Only that her late father's will might have been altered, something she discovered among his papers. A hush fell. I recalled Clementine's pale face when Poirot mentioned the will earlier. She rose unsteadily, meeting his gaze. My father left everything to his sister, Lady Edith, but I found reference to a codicil one that might include me. Poirot nodded. A motive, then, for secrecy and, perhaps, for elimination of the bearer of that secret Edward Marsh turned to Sir Charles, whose expression had stiffened. You, Sir Charles, stood to gain from the charity initiative, your reputation bolstered by a new wing named after Marsh in your own museum. Sir Charles's jaw clenched. My interest was purely philanthropic, yet your gallery's endowment fund swelled by Marsh's endorsements. Poirot tapped the ledger again. And you did not inform Lady Edith of this aspect. Lady Edith rose, affronted. I would never allow such vanity. Poirot's voice softened, perhaps not consciously, but consider this. When you invited Mr. Thornhill to the private viewing, you did so under the guise of scholarship deliberations, yet you omitted discussion of Marsh's secret codicil. That was known only to you and Marsh. Miss Clementine's cheeks went pale. She looked between her aunt and Sir Charles. I had no proof of the codicil. Marsh only hinted at its existence, and that hint, Poirot said, proved fatal. He turned to Mr. Thornhill. And you, sir, possessed the pigment and the means to craft both feather smear and poison. You travelled with your palette to this very house, true. Your bag of paints was never inventoried upon arrival. Thornhill stammered. My paints are my livelihood, some tubes I keep concealed. Concealed, Poirot repeated. Yet you allowed your glove smudge upon the reproduction. A careless flourish. He placed the torn page atop the desk. And you printed this note yourself, framing the clue ensuring others would be misled. Thornhill's nostrils flared. I did not kill Marsh. Possibly not with the blade in the library, Poirot conceded, but evidence suggests you sought to direct suspicion elsewhere. He paused, then at last addressed Clementine. You feared disinheritance. Lady Edith feared scandal. Sir Charles feared loss of influence. Miss Fane feared professional ruin. Thornhill feared tarnished reputation. Mrs. Cartwright feared betrayal of confidence. Each of you held a secret you wished to guard. He swept his gaze across the room, yet only one could execute murder and poisoning so elegantly, using art as both weapon and message. He stepped back, folding his hands. Now, my friends, we arrive at the precipice of revelation. Tomorrow we will test each of your alibis in the crucible of scrutiny, examining every moment, every step, every connection you share. For hidden threads will soon be pulled to the surface, and no secret will remain buried beneath painted feathers or whispered confidences. As Poirot concluded, a tremor passed through the group. Each suspect's eyes flickered with new awareness. They were no longer bound only by their own fears, but by the web that linked them, all connections that would either condemn or absolve them as the little grey cells completed their final work. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret Clutha, late morning. Hush in the library felt almost reverent as Monsieur Poirot invited me to join him at the long mahogany table. He had gathered the scattered evidence with deliberate precision, the broken feather fragment in its protective envelope, the torn booklet page bearing its cryptic injunction, and the collection of crystal glasses recovered from Sir Charles's study. Yet the centerpiece of his attention was a small, innocuous object I had overlooked entirely, a single camellia petal pressed beneath glass in a brass frame. Hastings, Poirot whispered, his eyes alight. This, my friend, is the secret I have withheld until now. Observe closely. He lifted the frame and placed it beneath a slender magnifying glass, angling the morning light to reveal fine details. Note the slight discoloration at the petal's edge. I peered through the lens. The camellia's pale ivory hue was mottled, with a faint green smear knot. The the rich emerald of Thornhill's pigment, but a washed-out variant that seemed barely dry. "It looks as though someone painted it and then mounted it before the die set," I said. "Precisely," Poirot exclaimed, his mustache twitching in satisfaction. "This petal came from the greenhouse brazier, yet it bears the same green pigment as the feather's broken bristle. But whereas the feather's pigment had long since dried evidenced by the slight cracking along its surface, this smear retained a softness, a moisture that indicates it was applied mere hours ago." I frowned. "So the murderer painted this petal only recently to implicate Clementine?" "Exactly." Poirot tapped the glass plate. "But the question is, when and by whom?" He retrieved his notebook, flipping to a blank page. "We know Clementine left the house at 10 past 10 to extinguish the brazier's fire." Mrs. Cartwright confirmed the smoke. "Yet if this petal was painted after that time when Clementine was under observation in the drawing-room, then she could not have applied it herself." I remembered Clementine's alibi and Mrs. Cartwright's account. "So someone else used the pomade or pigment to frame her, mais oui." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "But observe this second detail." He opened the magnifier to the decanter's stopper, which he had retrieved after the poisoning. "Look at the stopper's lip marks of tiny nicks, each inflicted by a fine tool, as though someone gratefully bit into it to steady their hand. But more tellingly, the stopper was replaced so gently that no shard of glass broke. Only someone accustomed to handling crystal with care could manage such precision." I nodded. "So our poisoner is practiced in porcelain and glass, not a brutish hand, but a refined one." "Refined," Poirot repeated. "That suggests an artist's delicacy, perhaps our critic, Miss Fane, or our hostess, Lady Edith. Yet neither has access to Thornhill's pigments. Only he, or the agent of the artist, could procure such hues." He looked up, steepling his fingers. "But here lies the true secret. The painted petal was mounted in its frame before the morning frost could seep into the greenhouse panes. That frost appeared at 2:17 a.m., recorded in the meteorological log hanging outside the servants' quarters." Poirot tapped a printed weather report. "Which means the petal must have been painted and framed between Mrs. Cartwright's report of the extinguished brazier at 10:12 p.m. and the frost's arrival at 2:17 a.m. Yet our only confirmed greenhouse visitor in that window was Mr. Thornhill, who claimed to have returned to his lodgings at 11. I frowned. "So his alibi is false, with his departure time misremembered by yourself and Mrs. Cartwright," Poirot said. "Which raises the question, did he slip away after we didn't plant this evidence, then return to the house unnoticed?" "But the servants would have seen him," I protested. "He signed out in the guest log at precisely 11:02 p.m. Poirot smiled thinly. "He signed with a borrowed pen, Mrs. Cartwright's silver fountain pen, which now bears microscopic scratches matching those in the ledger. The pen was recently serviced and its nib sharpened, yet those scratches indicate a second owner's handling." He produced the pen, turning it over. "Mr. Thornhill denied using this pen, yet his glove prints appear upon its barrel." I stared in astonishment. So he not only framed Clementine's brazier incident, but also manipulated the guest log itself. "Indeed," Poirot said, replacing the pen in its case. "This is the secret clue that unites the pigment, the pen, and the brazier petal. Trifecta of deception." He closed his notebook. "But we must test this conclusion carefully. We shall confront Mr. Thornhill with these inconsistencies, watching his reaction. For it is one thing to lie under pressure, quite another to maintain composure when every thread of one's story unravels." He stood, smoothing his coat. Now, Hastings, we prepare our trap. Let us invite the suspect to the greenhouse under the pretense of inspecting the camellias. There I shall produce the framed petal and the pen. His response will seal his fate. I rose, heart pounding, and the torn note, the feather fragment, the crystal stoppers, all will fall into place. Poirot said, smiling with unbridled confidence. For once one has uncovered the secret clue, the killer may attempt one final desperation. And that, my friend, will be our last test. He placed a firm hand on my shoulder. Come, let us set the stage. The little grey cells have spoken. Now it is time to watch the murderer squirm. And with that, we left the library, bearing the secret that would turn suspicion into certainty, certain that by tomorrow's end, the true culprit would stand exposed beneath the weight of irrefutable proof. Chapter 11. Tensions rise, the drawing room buzzed with uneasy energy as the suspects gathered once more under Monsieur Poirot's watchful eye. The morning's revelations, Thornhill's falsified log entry, the framed camellia petal, and the pen's telling scratches had set the stage. Yet rather than retreat into silence, the assembled party found themselves ensnared in a web of suspicion and recrimination that threatened to snap at any moment. Poirot stood at the head of the room, his arms folded, observing each of them in turn. Mes amis, he began quietly, there is much we have learned, and still more to uncover. But now, let us hear one another's thoughts. He inclined his head to Lady Edith Blanchard, seated upon a velvet chair near the hearth. Lady Edith rose, indignation sharpening her voice. I find it intolerable that you suggest I might frame my own niece, Monsieur Poirot. For what purpose would I smear a petal? To protect my reputation at the expense of an innocent girl. Her gloved hands clenched, Miss Clementine Blanchard pale, but resolute met her aunt's glare. Aunt Edith, you benefited from my silence regarding father's codicil. Without my claim, the estate rested squarely on your shoulders. She took a step forward. You had motive to remove Marsh for revealing that secret. Lady Edith's lips quivered. Your insinuations wound more than your words. I did not conspire to kill Edward Marsh. Sir Charles Wainwright interjected, stepping between them. Ladies, please. Accusations will achieve nothing. We must consider the true culprit, Mr. Thornhill. He pointed a finger at the agent, whose composure was cracking. Your pigment appeared on the feather, your glove prints on the pen, your lies in the log. Explain yourself. Thornhill straightened, cheeks flushed. I admit my errors of judgment, yet none justify murder or attempted poisoning. I only wished to protect Miss Venia's works from scandal. If the feather's secret code were made public, it would ruin her reputation. He glanced at Miss Fane, and you, Miss Fane. You two have claimed artistic authority, but refused to admit you handled the plates after I left the room. Miss Rosalind Fane's eyes narrowed. How dare you implicate me? My only interest is honest critique. But since you mention my involvement, I will remind you that you invited me to your carriage under false pretenses to secure my silence. She turned to Thornhill. You paid for my loyalty with convenience. Thornhill recoiled. I offered you safe passage in poor weather, nothing more. A sharp laugh cut through the tension as Mrs. Cartwright stepped forward, her gentle facade dissolved by anger. Safe passage, she snapped. I saw you in the conservatory at midnight, mixing pigment with water in a crystal decanter. Her accusation shocked the room into stillness. You intended to poison not only Sir Charles but any of us who might uncover your plot. Thornhill's eyes widened. Mrs. Cartwright, this is preposterous. Poirot raised a hand to quell the turmoil. Yes, madame, but note how each of you shifts blame onto another. Lady Edith denies motive. Clementine claims victorhood. Sir Charles appeals to logic. Thornhill protests innocence. Miss Fane defends artistry. Yet beneath these defences lies the true culprit, exploiting your conflicts. Sir Charles folded his arms. If I am innocent, Poirot, why does the evidence point so strongly to Thornhill? Poirot's gaze lingered on Sir Charles. Because Thornhill's actions are the most visible. But remember, a clever murderer will plant evidence to direct suspicion away from himself. We must consider who benefits from Thornhill's fall. He turned to Clementine. Miss Clementine, you feared If Thornhill takes the blame, your secret remains safe. Clementine's face flushed. Do not implicate me in more conspiracy, Monsieur Poirot. Madame Poirot addressed Lady Edith. If Thornhill is guilty, you escape scrutiny. Convenient. No, he paused, letting the thought resonate. Lady Edith's shoulders sagged. I only wish the truth to surface. Indeed, Poirot said softly. Now, Miss Fane, if Thornhill is guilty, your professional reputation remains intact. But if not, if your knowledge of pigment aided the crime, then you omit nothing. Her lips tightened. Miss Fane turned away. I have nothing more to say. A tense silence fell. Poirot's eyes narrowed. We see how quickly you circle like wolves, seeking a lone scapegoat, yet a pack hunt requires coordination. Consider who orchestrated last night's poison in the decanter. His gaze found Sir Charles. You, too, had access to the decanter missing from your own bar for several minutes after dinner. Sir Charles's jaw clenched. I took it to the library for my own drink. Did not know it was poisoned. It is your word against evidence, Poirot said. But note the residue of camellia ash on its stopper matching the brazier found. Only in the greenhouse. Who among you visited both greenhouse and study in that crucial window? Clementine drew in a breath. I saw Mrs. Cartwright leave the drawing room after dinner, heading for the greenhouse. I thought she sought fresh air. Mrs. Cartwright's eyes widened. I went, as ever, to tend the plants. Only you and I visit there at night. Pure lips curved. And you must explain why I found a folded map of the estate with the safe's location circled in the greenhouse drawer. Prepared in advance yet planted, perhaps, to implicate another. Each suspect shifted in place, the room charged with impatience and fear. Poirot raised his hand once more. Enough. We have laid bare the tensions and seen how each of you stands poised to cast blame. Tomorrow we shall conduct the final interviews. Until then, reflect on what you have learned, that alliances are fragile. And in a house of lies, the most vulnerable prey is he who trusts only himself. As he concluded, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, echoing the storm that now raged within the drawing room. Each suspect departed in silence, the air thick with mutual suspicion and dread, while Poirot and I exchanged a knowing glance. The web of hidden connections had produced its first true fracture. But whether it would reveal the murderer or merely deepen the mystery remained to be seen. Chapter 12. The confrontation late that afternoon. The heavy oak doors of Sir Reginald's library swung closed behind us, sealing off the world beyond. The gathering dusk filtered through the stained glass windows, casting fractured pools of colour upon the carpet, as though the house itself were stained by suspicion. Monsieur Poirot stood near the fireplace, his small frame illuminated by the dancing flames, while I took my place beside him. Before us sat our principal suspect, Mr. Garrick Thornhill, his shoulders slumped and eyes darting from Poirot to the door. Poirot folded his hands and regarded Thornhill with an inscrutable expression. "Monsieur Thornhill," he began, voice measured, "we have traced every pigment smear, every false step, and every planted clue back to you. Yet I sense you wish to speak more than your denials permit. Tonight I offer you the opportunity to speak freely, without fear of misinterpretation." Thornhill swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. He drew in a trembling breath. "Monsieur Poirot, he stopped, as though uncertain where to begin. Poirot's moustache twitched. "You will recall our discussion of the camellia petal, framed and mounted in the greenhouse. You insisted. You left the estate at 11, yet the mounting required time and secrecy. I ask you now, why did you return to the greenhouse at midnight?" Thornhill's brow furrowed. I needed fresh air." The tension was stifling. He forced a wan smile. "I thought a short walk would calm my nerves." Poirot leaned forward. A plausible excuse, yet the brazier's ashes had been disturbed, only moments before, long after you claimed to have departed. And you carried with you not only the pigment, but that silver fountain pen, which you used to sign the guest log. Why did you not leave the pen on your desk, as your fellow guests did? Thornhill's lip quivered. "It was my companion. I misplaced it and carried it for comfort." "Comfort," Poirot repeated. A curious sentiment for a man facing unfounded suspicion. He paused, then produced the framed petal. "You saw this, did you not?" He angled the brass frame toward Thornhill. "You crafted it by mixing pigment with water from the decanter water you had laced with poison earlier that evening." Thornhill's face paled. "No, that is impossible. I did not." "Ah, but you did," Poirot said softly. "Dr. Ellis will confirm the presence of your pigment in the decanter's residual drops. And Mrs. Cartwright observed your silhouette bending over the crystal vessel." Thornhill clutched at the arms of his chair as if to steady himself. Poirot continued, his tone unhurried. "Why target Sir Charles? Why plant evidence against Miss Clementine? What did you hope to achieve by using the feather's pigment in your crimes?" Thornhill's shoulders shook with a single convulsive breath. He rose unsteadily, voice breaking. I did not mean to kill, only to frighten." He clenched his fists. "I discovered that Marsh had found proof of a clandestine agreement with Lady Edith and Sir Charles, something that would implicate Miss Clementine in a family scandal. I feared for Miss Venier's reputation. Her feather was meant to be a masterpiece, not a harbinger of ruin." Poirot inclined his head. "A misguided attempt to preserve beauty from exposure, but you escalated when your initial ploy failed. You hoped that fear would force the secret from complacent lips." The eyes brimmed. "Yes. I thought that if the family believed the feather's code pointed to Clementine, they would reveal the truth before more harm was done. But loyalties shifted, and I realized too late that I had become the murderer." He looked to me, desperation in his gaze. "Hastings, you know me. I never bore Marsh ill will. I only manipulated circumstances, never intended him harm." Poirot nodded slowly. "Your confession is partial but damning. You admit to poisoning and framing, but not to the blade in the library that ended Marsh's life. Who struck the fatal blow?" Thornhill's face contorted with anguish. "I did not kill him with the letter opener. That was Lady Edith." A chorus of gasps filled the room. Lady Edith started, her knitting needles slipping between her fingers. Sir Charles stiffened. Miss Clementine covered her mouth. Mrs. Cartwright's eyes widened as tears sprang unbidden. Poirot's keen gaze never wavered. "Lady Edith Blanchard," he said, voice as quiet as a whisper, "it seems you believed that Marsh's codicil would orphan you from your inheritance. When Thornhill's schemes failed to compel him, you took matters into your own hands." Lady Edith rose, face ashen. She opened her mouth, but no words came. She sank back into her chair, tears carving paths through her makeup. Poirot turned to me. "Hastings, summon Inspector Morton. This matter is no longer his concern, it is ours to resolve." He placed a steadying hand on Lady Edith's shoulder, guiding her attention. "Madame, confess freely, for in truth lies redemption. What transpired that night in the library?" Through her tears, Lady Edith spoke in a trembling voice. "Marsh. He told me of the codicil my father's will altered to favour Clementine. He thrust the feather at me, as though to make me listen. I lost control. I grabbed the letter opener from the desk, and she covered her face. I plunged it into his heart. I did not see the feather smear with blood until he fell. A hush ensued, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Miss Clementine wept softly. Sir Charles buried his face in his hands. Thornhill trembled anew, tears mingling with guilt. Poirot nodded gently. "It is done, Mies Amos. The blade and the poison were the work of two desperate souls, one to conceal a secret, the other to avenge a perceived betrayal. Both acts spring from the same root, the fear of disgrace." He turned to Inspector Morton, who had entered at his summons. "Inspector, Lady Edith Blanchard confesses to the fatal blow. Mr. Thornhill admits poisoning. You will take them into custody." As the inspector moved forward, restraints in hand, Poirot fell silent for a moment, eyes reflecting the dying embers of the fire. Then he addressed me quietly. "Mon ami, it is often the case that the most elegant mystery conceals multiple truths. Tonight, we have uncovered both murder and attempted murder, woven together by pigment and passion." I nodded, still stunned by the revelation. "And now justice will be served." Poirot drew a deep breath. "Indeed, and may the little grey cells of conscience guide us all toward understanding and forgiveness in the days to come." Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape the moon had risen high by the time Inspector Morton and his constables escorted Lady Edith Blanchard and Mr. Garrick Thornhill toward the awaiting police carriage. The corridor outside the drawing-room, normally hushed, now echoed with the click of handcuffs and the muted breath of servants straining to catch a final glimpse of scandal. I trailed behind Monsieur Poirot, who walked with composed dignity, his gaze fixed ahead as though steering a ship through treacherous waters. We reached the front vestibule, where two uniformed policemen stood guard beside the heavy oak door. The night air was crisp, scented faintly with rose from the gardens, but inside each of us felt the chill of impending consequences. Poirot paused, lifting a hand to halt the procession. "Inspector," he said quietly, his voice deliberate, "before you remove them, ensure the study and greenhouse are secured. There may yet be materials, letters, pigments, papers that bear upon this case." Morton bowed. "Of course, monsieur, we will search every inch." As the inspector signalled his men, I saw Lady Edith, her dress slightly her cloak with trembling fingers, while Thornhill, pale but defiant, surveyed the doorway. For a moment, he and I locked eyes. I thought I saw a flicker of something regret, perhaps or resolve before he turned away. We watched as the constables led them toward the carriage. Then, inexplicably, a sudden commotion erupted. Thornhill lurched forward, yanking his wrists free with a strength born of desperation. The silver pen he had once wielded with such confidence slipped from his coat pocket, clattering across the stone floor. "Stop him!" Morton barked, drawing his truncheon. But Thornhill was already moving. He darted past the nearest constable, pushing through the vestibule door and into the night. The second constable lunged, but Thornhill's long legs carried him swiftly down the gravel drive, his dark coat billowing behind him like a shadow made flesh. I felt Poirot's hand on my arm. Hastings remained calm, yet my heart pounded so violently I could hear its thunder in my ears. Without hesitation, we gave chase, flanked by 2 constables. The air stung my lungs as we followed Thornhill through the moonlit gardens, past sculpted hedges and beneath ancient oaks whose branches dripped with silver light. The path curved toward the greenhouse, its glass panes gleaming in the distance. Poirot moved with surprising alacrity, hatless in his greatcoat, each step measured. "He heads for the greenhouse," he observed, voice low but firm. "He believes he can hide among the plants, perhaps even destroy evidence before recapture." We reached the greenhouse door moments later, its knob still slightly warm to the touch Thornhill had entered only instants before. Morton flung the door open, and the warm, humid air of the conservatory enveloped us, perfumed with jasmine and camellia. Within, Thornhill knelt at the brass-framed camellia petal, now unhinged from its mounting, and the silver pen lay uncapped beside him. He looked up, eyes wild, cradling the loose petal as though it were a fragile prize. "I will not be accused," he shouted, voice echoing among the glass panels. "You must see she drove me to it." Lady Edith forced my hand. Poirot advanced slowly, holding up a single finger. "Enough, Monsieur Thornhill. There is no need for further violence." He coughed once, producing from his breast pocket the small velvet case that had held the letter opener's blade. "You sought to frame Lady Edith and Clementine alike, but in so doing, you nearly destroyed the record that exposes the true architect. This blade, which you hoped to conceal, remains intact." Thornhill's shoulders sagged with despair as he recognized the pen in Poirot's other hand. "You're mistaken. I came to retrieve the pen, to destroy the logs." Poirot shook his head. "No, mon ami, you came to confess. You see that evidence cannot be erased by panic. The greenhouse logs, the ledger pages, even this humble petal bear your fingerprint in pigment and water. Flight will avail you nothing." A sob escaped Thornhill's lips. "I didn't want Marsh dead, only silenced, and I shouldn't have helped Lady Edith cover her crime." He dropped the petal to the ground, where its ivory edge lay stained with green and brown. It was supposed to end with a scare. I didn't know she would kill him. Inspector Morton reached Thornhill's side and resecured the handcuffs. "You're under arrest again, Thornhill." As the officers guided him away first, back through the cold gardens toward the main house, Poirot turned to me, his expression inscrutable. "Hastings, the desperate act of flight has confirmed our suspicions. Only a guilty conscience drives a man to such measures." I nodded, breathless from running. "Yes, Poirot, but Lady Edith, what of her? Will she accept her punishment willingly?" Poirot's smile was faint, almost sorrowful. "We shall see, mon ami. Guilt takes many forms. Some confess aloud, others carry their burden in silence. For now, let us return to the drawing room and secure the remaining evidence." We retraced our steps, lantern light guiding us past the sculpted topiaries, back to the house. Inside, Lady Edith sat in her backed chair, her head bowed, hands folded in her lap. When she looked up and saw us, her eyes brimmed with tears. Poirot paused before her. "Madame, you witnessed Thornhill's attempt to flee. Does his capture bring you relief for further sorrow?" Lady Edith's voice trembled. I'm lost, Monsieur Poirot. I never wanted this. Never." He inclined his head gently. "I know, you acted in terror and grief, but truth demands acknowledgement. I urge you to speak now, so that the path to justice and, perhaps mercy may, begin." She opened her mouth to reply, but the moments stretched. Outside, the carriage wheels turned, carrying Thornhill once more into custody, and within the hushed drawing-room, the final pieces of the puzzle settled into place, as each soul faced the consequences of secrets laid bare under the merciless light of scrutiny. Tomorrow, Poirot would bring the grand finale covering for all to see, the full tapestry of motive, opportunity, and crime woven through the enigma of the painted swan feather. But for tonight, we stood amid the aftermath of desperation, knowing that escape was never an option when the little grey cells had spoken. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place by the following morning. An uneasy calm had settled over Blanchard Hall. The corridors, once alight with frantic footsteps, now echoed only with the measured clip of servants attending to half-finished tasks. In the drawing-room, Monsieur Poirot stood before the tall windows, the pale light of dawn framing his silhouette like a sentinel anticipating dawn's judgments. I approached quietly, bearing a tray of tea and biscuits, yet found my own hands trembling with expectation. "Mon ami Poirot," said softly, as I set the tray upon the side table, "the moment has arrived. All lies have been sifted, all motives laid bare. Now we need but one final confirmation before we assemble our suspects for the grand revelation." I poured the tea, noting the tiny beads of condensation on the porcelain. "What remains, Poirot?" He drew from his breast pocket a small envelope, sealed with Sir Reginald's family crest in crimson wax. "This letter," he said, "was discovered hidden beneath the false bottom of Marsh's notebook, a document that Marsh carried at the time of his murder but could not clutch in his final moments. He intended to present it to Lady Edith and Sir Charles after our evening's business." I exchanged a look with him. "The codicil, then?" "Precisely." Poirot broke the seal and withdrew a single sheet of creamy parchment, its edges trimmed with faint lilac ink. He held it up. "Careful not to crease the paper. Read, Hastings." I took the sheet. The elegant handwriting was Marsh's, firm and flowing, to be revealed upon the death of Reginald Blanchard. "There exists a codicil naming Miss Clementine Blanchard as sole beneficiary of Blanchard Manor. Should any harm befall Sir Reginald, this codicil supersedes the will executed 2 years prior. The instructing hand of Sir Reginald himself affirms this change." I looked up as the weight of the words sank in. So Lady Edith stood to lose everything upon Marsh's revelation. Poirot nodded, and Sir Charles's museum wing would have been renamed, his endowment diminished. Both had motive to suppress this document or to prevent its disclosure. Through more final measures, he slipped the letter back into its envelope. But there is yet one more piece, the murder weapon itself. He glanced toward the hearth, where the letter opener had been placed for safekeeping. "Observe," he retrieved the ornate letter opener, its steel blade gleaming under the morning light. The family crest on its ivory handle bore a faint scratch almost imperceptible. Poirot knelt, running his finger along the minute groove. This scratch aligns exactly with the worn edge of Lady Edith's broocher pin of her grandmother's design. In the scuffle of the murder, she attempted to ward off the blade by striking it against her brooch. The resulting mark matches perfectly. I peered closely, so she wounded her own brooch, evidence she could not know would survive. The scene, indeed, Poirot said, standing. Every element now converges. The feather's pigment tracing Thornhill's hand, the framed petal exposing his framing of Clementine, the codicil letter confirming motive, and the brooch scratch revealing the moment of truth in the library. He folded his arms, studying the assembled pieces. We have learned much from your confessions and our observations, yet a murder, once committed, demands a final encounter-gathering where each suspect hears the conclusion of the story woven through the evidence. He tapped the letter opener's handle. Now, Hastings, prepare the guests. In 2 hours, we convene in the drawing-room. There, we will reconstruct Marsh's final hour, piece by piece, until the murderer stands alone in the light of absolute truth. I nodded. Shall I summon Lady Edith, Sir Charles, Miss Clementine, and Miss Fane? Also Mrs. Cartwright, Poirot added. Her steadfast record-keeping provided the timestamps that anchored our timeline. Each will play their part in the denouement. As I left to deliver the summons, I felt the hush of anticipation deepen. The servants paused in their tasks to glance toward the drawing-room, aware that something momentous would unfold. In the library, the feather fragment, the framed petal, the codicil letter, and the letter opener rested together as silent witnesses. When I returned, the suspects filed in one by one. Lady Edith in a simple black dress, her face drawn. Sir Charles, stiffly attired, his expression cautious. Miss Clementine pale yet determined. Miss Fane composed, though her eyes flickered with curiosity. And Mrs. Cartwright, serene beneath a mask of duty. Poirot greeted them, voice warm yet unyielding. Mies. Amos, we are reunited to complete our journey through a night of darkness and deception. Soon, every question will find its answer. He gestured to the table where he had arranged the evidence. Observe these tokens. A painted feather, a framed petal, a hidden letter, and a wounded brooch. Each speaks of a moment, clues that, when united, revealed the full design of tragedy. The room fell silent as each suspect absorbed his words. Poirot's mere presence seemed to amplify the gravity of the scene. First, he continued, picking up the feather fragment, we found this in Marsh's hand. The violet pigment matched his final interest in Thornhill's omission to list Vinier's mixed hues. He nodded at Thornhill, whose shoulders sagged further. Second, this camellia petal, framed to implicate Clementine, revealed your desperate plot to mislead. He placed the petal alongside the feather. Third, he said, extending the codicil's envelope. This letter confirmed the motive driving Lady Edith to desperation. He allowed Lady Edith a moment to glance at its familiar seal. Lastly, the letter opener's scratch by Lady Edith's flinching defense marks the very instant when she took Marsh's life. Each piece lay in a neat row. Poirot stepped back, hands clasped before him. Now, I invite you to listen as I recount the final hours, drawing upon your own statements and the evidence at hand. When finished, only one will remain, not merely bearing the weight of guilt, but facing the certainty that justice cannot be evaded. He inhaled, as though drawing strength. Let us begin with the first deadly strike. He paused, eyes sweeping the room, and made the little grey cells guide us to truth's final unveiling. With that, he sat, and the suspects leaned forward, rapt and resigned, as he launched into the last threads of the mystery, each word closing the net around the guilty heart concealed among them. Chapter 15. The final. Gathering, the drawing room was hushed to a reverent stillness as the last of the guests took their seats. A single lamp burned upon the side table, its soft glow illuminating the anxious faces of Lady Edith Blanchard, Sir Charles Wainwright, Miss Clementine Blanchard, Miss Rosalind Fane, and Mrs. Cartwright. Even the portraits that lined the walls seemed to lean forward, as if intent upon the culmination of our tale. At the head of the room stood Monsieur Poirot, his posture regal and calm, every feature poised for the grand finale. Miss Amos Poirot began, his voice resonant in the quiet. We have collected our evidence, heard confessions, observed reactions, and tested alibis. Now, we gather to reconstruct the sequence of events, moment by moment, until the culprit stands exposed by the weight of undeniable truth. He gestured toward the mantel, upon which lay the feather fragment, the framed camellia petal, the codicil letter, and the letter opener. With deliberate care, Poirot lifted the feather fragment. At approximately 10:37 p.m., Edward Marsh, driven by curiosity, unlocked the display case and examined the plume. D. Cygna. He had discovered a hidden code annotations in the reproduction booklets that only he could decipher. It was then that Mr. Thornhill observed him, noting its significance and smearing his own pigment upon the hinge to create confusion. He placed the feather down and turned to Thornhill, who sat rigid, eyes lowered. Yet this was but the first stroke in a much darker design. Poirot turned to Mrs. Cartwright. Shortly thereafter, Miss Clementine, believing her booklet secure in the study safe, was summoned by Marsh to discuss private matters. They conversed until 10:47, when the safe was opened and the codicil removed. He paused, letting the moment linger. At that moment, Lady Edith entered, unannounced, her face pale with fear and rage. He looked to Lady Edith, who trembled ever so slightly. Marsh brandished the feather and revealed the codicil's contents. Poirot continued. He thrust the feather toward Lady Edith, a gesture meant to share his proof. Shocked, she drew the letter opener from the desk, and he raised the ornate blade, its tip glinting, struck him. A single, precise thrust, delivered at the height of her terror. Marsh fell, the feather slipping from his hand as his life's blood spread upon its painted surface. A soft gasp broke from Miss Clementine, and Sir Charles's jaw clenched. Poirot held the blade aloft for a heartbeat, then set it back down. This was the moment when death first visited Blanchard Hall. But the murderer's work did not end with the blade. He lifted the framed camellia petal. In the ensuing chaos, Mr. Thornhill seized his opportunity. He slipped away under the pretext of checking the brazier in the conservatory, planted pigment upon the petals to frame Miss Clementine, and returned to the house disguised by the darkness. There, he carefully laced Sir Charles's brandy with poison derived from the same pigment mixture. Eyes flicked to Thornhill, whose fingers twitched at the table's edge. Poirot set the petal down. Sir Charles, unsuspecting, took his customary draught after our midday repast and collapsed. His life was spared only by quick action and the antidote I carried. He inclined his head to Dr. Ellis. Seated just outside the door, Dr. Ellis offered a faint nod in confirmation. Poirot's gaze swept the room. Thus, two separate attempts upon life, one fatal, one nearly so, both linked by the artistry of pigment and the instruments of betrayal. He paused, allowing the gravity to sink in. Yet there remains one final enigma: the precise ordering of these events, and the concealed hand that orchestrated both. He turned to Mrs. Cartwright. Your meticulous records established the timeline, the safe's opening at 10:47, the distress call at 10:52, the brazier incident at 11:03, and the poisoning at midday. She bowed her head, the burden of her duty evident in her countenance. Poirot steepled his fingers. Now, I ask each of you to recall your whereabouts during these pivotal moments, speaking truthfully and without hesitation, for the final piece of this puzzle rests upon the precise intersection of opportunity and motive. He began with Lady Edith. Madame, at the moment of Mr. Marsh's fall, you stood over his body. Lady Edith swallowed, glancing at the feather, now stained. I stumbled back in horror, she said falteringly. I did not flee. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, you called for help. Yet the blade you wielded remains that of the family's heirloom letter opener. Your fingerprints attest to that fact. Lady Edith closed her eyes. I did not plan to kill him. It was instinct. Poirot then turned to Sir Charles. Sir Charles, having discovered the body, you locked the study door and summoned Mrs. Cartwright. You later claimed to wander the corridors in shock. Yet your fingerprints were found upon the decanters, stopper and the glass. Sir Charles's shoulders tensed. Explain. Sir Charles took a shaky breath. I handled the decanter after seeing Marsh's body. I offered Lady Edith a glass to calm her. Miss Clementine interjected softly. I saw him replace the stopper before returning to the drawing room. Poirot nodded. Your actions may well have been innocent, yet the residue of camellia ash upon the stopper confirms that the poison was mixed in the conservatory. Mr. Thornhill alone had motive and means to prepare it. He shifted his attention to Miss Clementine. Mademoiselle, you stood to gain from the codicil's revelation, yet you acted only in shock. You reported the brazier fire to distract attention, an act of confusion, not malice. Clementine exhaled, relief mingled with sorrow in her eyes. Poirot turned to Miss Fane. Miss Fane, you sketched the feather and judged its artistry, yet you bore no hand in its weaponization. She nodded, lips pressed tightly. Your only crime was curiosity. He faced Thornhill last. Monsieur Thornhill, you framed an innocent, attempted murder by poison, and sought to misdirect us. With planted evidence, your actions were deliberate, your deceptions intricate, yet you acted under the belief that you protected art's reputation. Thornhill's face had gone ashen. He rose, shoulders slumped. Confess. Poirot bowed his head slightly. And so the final piece falls into place. You stand, revealed, as the architect of fear and falsehood. Yet recall, it was Lady Edith's impulse that dealt the first fatal blow. He stepped aside, arms outstretched. Mise amis, the mystery is solved. 2 lives were imperiled by secrets and painted lies. Now, justice may follow its course. A tense silence enveloped the room as the suspects absorbed the full measure of Poirot's reconstruction. The feather, the petal, the letter, the blade lay displayed like notes in a final chord. And in that moment, beneath the lamp's gentle glow, the enigma of the painted swan feather found its closure, leaving only the quiet aftermath of revealed truth. With that, Poirot rose, signaling the end of our gathering. I thank you all for your patience. May this resolution bring peace and, perhaps, forgiveness to those whose lives have been irrevocably altered." As the guests rose and the servants prepared to escort them from the room, I sensed that the bonds forged in suspicion would linger far longer than the memory of the crime itself. Yet at least here, in Blanchard Hall, the little grey cells had prevailed, and the secret of the painted feather lay finally exposed. Chapter 16. The reveal the drawing-room had emptied of servants, and the guests, save for Lady Edith Blanchard and Mr. Garrick Thornhill, had retreated to the adjacent sitting room, their whispered speculations echoing through the heavy doors. Monsieur Poirot motioned for me to remain beside him, and together we awaited the final moment of justice. In his hand he held the ornate letter opener and the framed camellia petal, symbols of both calculated artifice and impulsive violence. "Mon ami," he said quietly, "the stage is set. Now we will call back the culprits and lay bare their deeds." He rose, smoothing his coat, and crossed to the door. "Inspector Morton," he called, his voice carrying crisp authority. "If you please." The inspector reinterred his face, grave. Behind him followed two constables who bore Lady Edith and Thornhill in separate pairs of cuffed hands. Each looked pale and resigned, as though the weight of their crimes had already been served. Poirot stepped between them, raising his hands to command attention. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his accent precise and clipped, "we are once more assembled in this room of truth. Before you stand the individuals responsible for the tragedies that beset Blanchard Hall, Mr. Garrick Thornhill, agent of art, and Lady Edith Blanchard, mistress of this house." He turned first to Thornhill. "Monsieur Thornhill, you plotted to conceal Edward Marsh's discovery of a secret codicil by smearing pigment on a painted feather, by framing an innocent young lady, and by poisoning Sir Charles Wainwright. You employed your knowledge of Lucille Vigne's palette to manufacture misdirection and to nearly take a man's life. Yet under the magnifying glass of logic and observation, your hand trembled, leaving evidence at every turn-glove prints on the reproduction booklets, ash on the camellia petals, and misused ink upon the guest ledger." He placed the framed petal upon the table. "This petal, painted and framed in the dead of night, bore your fingerprint in pigment proof that you orchestrated deception itself." Thornhill's shoulders sagged, his eyes cast downward. Poirot then bowed slightly to Lady Edith. "Madame, your motive sprang from fear of disgrace, of financial ruin, of losing all you held dear. When Edward Marsh thrust the painted swan feather at you, revealing the codicil that would disinherit you, your panic overcame reason. You seized the letter O'Panara family heirloomed, struck with savage precision, silencing the bearer of truth in a single fatal thrust." He lifted the blade, pointing its tip toward her. "The scratch upon its handle matches the imprint of your brooch, struck in the violent moment when life spilled from Marsh's breast." Lady Edith's lips trembled as she met Poirot's gaze. I acted in terror. I did not intend to murder him." Poirot's voice softened only slightly. "Intent often follows motive. You bore a secret that you valued above a man's life." He turned to Inspector Morton. "Inspector, you have your orders. These two shall be tried for their crimes, poisoning and conspiracy on one hand, murder on the other. May justice be swift, guided by the evidence we present here today." As the inspector moved forward to take Thornhill's arm, Thornhill whispered hoarsely, "I never meant for it to go this far." Lady Edith knelt suddenly, head bowed, sobs escaping her lips. "I cannot live with what I have done." Poirot watched them, expression inscrutable. Then he addressed me. "Hastings, the little grey cells have prevailed. Yet I pitied both the victim and the perpetrators, for the true tragedy lies not only in death and betrayal, but in the destruction of trust. I nodded, feeling the sombre weight of his words. Poirot straightened and looked once more at the assembled evidence: the feather, the petal, the codicil letter, and the letter opener. Let this tableau stand as testament to the power and danger of secrets and artifice combined, and let it remind us that the search for truth, though arduous, must never falter. He turned to the remaining guests, who had quietly at the inspector's signal. You, who witnessed these events, shall carry this lesson forward, that what is hidden in pigment and parchment may yet be revealed by the most unlikely of detectives. A hush fell, broken only by the faint crackle of the dying fire. Then Sir Charles Wainwright stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand upon Lady Edith's shoulder. Clementine and Miss Fane exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of relief and sorrow. Inspector Morton gave a curt nod. I will see to their removal. You have our deepest gratitude, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot inclined his head once. I am delighted to have served. May the little grey cells guide us all toward clearer hearts. As the constables led Thornhill and Lady Edith from the room, the survivors remained to close the chapter on a night that had tested every bond of loyalty and revealed the fatal allure of concealed truths. And as the door clicked shut, I knew that Blanchard Hall would bear these memories long after the footprints in the garden had faded. Thus concluded the revealer final, unmasking of guilt and the restoration of order through the unringed logic of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice weeks had passed since the dramatic revelations at Blanchard Hall, and yet the memory of that moonlit night remained vivid in my mind. The estates of Sir Reginald lay quiet under a gentle spring sun as I accompanied Hercule Poirot along the gravel path toward the carriage that would return me to London. The morning air was sweet with flowering shrubs, but beneath its serenity lingered the weight of recent events of lives irrevocably altered by secrets and the pursuit of justice. Mon ami, Poirot began, his tone reflective as he surveyed the manicured gardens. The wheels of justice now turn, yet I sense you wonder at the fates of those we left behind. I nodded. Indeed, Poirot, how fares Lady Edith Blanchard, now that her confession is in the hands of the courts? He paused, selecting a camellia blossom dropped upon the path. She stands charged with manslaughter rather than murderer. Recognition of her momentary panic and lack of premeditation. The judge, guided by Marsh's codicil and the evidence of her remorse, has offered a sentence of suspended imprisonment coupled with psychiatric care. In truth, Hastings, her crime sprang from the terror of disgrace more than malice. I exhaled, imagining Lady Edith in the hush of a courtroom, and Mr. Thornhill. Poirot tucked the blossom into his lapel. Thornhill's more complex. He faced charges of attempted murder by poisoning and conspiracy. His knowledge of pigment and his framing of Miss Clementine left the jury little room for leniency. He received a full term in prison, though the court recognized mitigating factors, his initial intent to frighten rather than kill. Nevertheless, punishment must follow purpose. A carriage rattled past, bearing a rural family heading toward market. I looked at my companion and Miss Clementine. Poirot's lips curved into a gentle smile. Miss Clementine, though her inheritance was confirmed by Marsh's codicil, chose to refuse the bulk of her fortune. She established a charitable trust in Edward Marsh's name, endowing scholarships for art restoration students, the very endeavour Marsh had championed. Thus, she honors his memory and transforms the pain of betrayal into the promise of renewal. I warmed to the news. A fitting tribute, indeed, Poirot said, and Sir Charles Wainwright, his museum wing now bears Marsh's name, and he has publicly acknowledged his role in the events, though he escaped criminal charges. The near poisoning was deemed Thornhill's handiwork. Poirot's expression grew contemplative. Sir Charles has pledged to heighten safety measures in his institutions, ensuring that no art nor life suffers from the greed or negligence of men. I looked ahead as the carriage driver briefed us. What of Miss Fane and Mrs. Cartwright? Miss Fane returned to her critical work in London, her reputation enhanced by her cooperation. She published a nuanced essay on the interplay of art and deception, a subtle exploration of how beauty can harbor danger. Poirot chuckled softly. Her next exhibition review will undoubtedly be read with fresh eyes. And Mrs. Cartwright? I asked. She remains at Blanchard Hall, her loyalty undiminished. She was lauded for her meticulous records and calm under duress. Though she faced no charges, the experience changed. Her she now mentors young house stewards, teaching them that attention to detail can save lives. We reached the carriage, and Poirot paused to survey the hall's facade one last time. Hastings, you see that justice, while tempered by mercy, must be precise. Each sentence matched the nature of the crime, as the little grey cells dictate. I climbed into the carriage and settled upon the plush seat. Do you ever tire of these mysteries, Poirot? He smiled, stepping back as the driver climbed too. His box, tired. None, mon ami. Each case reveals new facets of human nature, and though the enigma may resolve in sadness or relief, the pursuit of truth is its own reward. As the carriage rumbled away, I glimpsed him in the rear view, the slight figure framed by flowering bushes, his moustache tilted in contentment. A final wave, and he turned back toward the hall, toward new cases, new puzzles for his extraordinary mind. In the days that followed, I reflected often upon the affair at Blanchard Hall. The painted swan feather, once merely a work of art, had become a symbol of secrets and redemption, its intricate beauty concealing motives both noble and nefarious. Yet, through meticulous observation, unyielding logic, and compassion for the frailty of the human heart, Hercule Poirot had transformed tragedy into closure. And so, as I returned to London's bustle, I carried with me the lesson that beneath every perfect surface may lie hidden truths, and that justice, like art, demands both precision and empathy. The little grey cells had triumphed once more, unraveling the threads of deception to restore order, compassion, and the promise of second chances. Chapter 18. The closing remark. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden rays across the drawing room's polished floorboards as the last of the guests gathered for one final farewell. The atmosphere, once charged with suspicion and fear, had softened into a solemn harmony. Lady Edith Blanchard, now resting under a guarded pardon, stood beside Sir Charles Wainwright, each exchanging a quiet, reconciling embrace with Miss Clementine. Miss Rosalind Fane observed with dignified reserve, and Mrs. Cartwright, ever the stalwart guardian of propriety, offered reassuring nods to all. At the centre of this subdued assembly stood Hercule Poirot, his posture as precise and poised as ever, a small, triumphant smile playing upon his lips. Mies, Amos, Poirot began, his voice gentle yet carrying to every corner of the room. We have journeyed together through a night of deception, fear, and ultimately revelation. It is my privilege to offer a few final observations, that we might depart with clarity and hope." He paused, allowing the room to settle. Then, with a graceful gesture, he pointed to the display case where the painted swan feather once lay. That case now stood empty, its locks untouched, symbolizing the restoration of trust. "First," Poirot continued, "we learned that beauty can conceal secrets, and that art, as much as any instrument, may be turned to sinister ends. Yet it is also art that binds USA testament to human creativity and the bonds we share." He glanced at Miss Fane. "Your essays and critiques will remind many that the line between illusion and reality is thinner than we imagine." Poirot then turned to Clementine. "Miss Clementine, your courage in channeling your inheritance into a philanthropic legacy honors Edward Marsh's memory and redeems a family's sorrow with hope for future generations." Clementine bowed her head modestly. "I only wish to fulfill his dreams." "No," Poirot said warmly, "you have done more than that. You have proven that from tragedy one may build compassion." Next, he addressed Sir Charles. "Sir Charles, your prompt efforts to acknowledge and share Marsh's legacy even as you faced your own peril demonstrated the capacity for leadership rooted in integrity." Sir Charles inclined his head. Lady Edith stepped forward, her gaze steady. "Monsieur Poirot, I cannot express how indebted I am to you for exposing my folly and granting me a chance at redemption." Poirot's eyes softened. "Madame, remorse is the first step toward atonement. Your acceptance of responsibility and the court's compassionate sentencing provide the framework for your healing. May you find peace in forgiveness, both given and received." He then turned to Thornhill, who had been invited to observe from a discreet distance, his once bold bearing humbled. "And you, Monsieur Thornhill," Poirot said, "have learned that the pursuit of protection, however well intended, never override respect for life. May your time of reflection lead to understanding and, in due course, redemption." Thornhill offered a tentative nod, tears glistening in his eyes. Poirot finally addressed Mrs. Cartwright. "Madame, your steadfast vigilance and meticulous records were the keystones upon which truth was found. Your calm under pressure saved lives and preserved justice." She gave a humble curtsy. Turning fully to the assembled company, Poirot raised one gloved hand. "Tonight we have closed the case of the affair at Blanchard Hall, a tale of painted feathers, hidden codicils, and fractured loyalties. In every mystery one finds not only the soul of the criminal, but the soul of humanity itself, with all its frailty and its grace." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, then offered a characteristic flourish of his moustache. "And now, mes amis, let us remember that the little grey cells are not merely instruments of detection, but guardians of justice and compassion. They remind us that even in our darkest hours, reason must guide our judgments, and empathy must temper our conclusions." A gentle smile spread across Poirot's face as he surveyed the faces before him, some marked by sorrow, others by relief, but all united by the shared journey toward truth. With a final, almost imperceptible nod, he concluded, "May you all find peace in the knowledge that, though secrets may lie hidden for a time, the light of truth will always prevail." As he stepped back, the assembled guests rose, offering one another embraces and quiet words of forgiveness. The empty feather display stood as silent testament to the resolution of intrigue, while outside the dusk deepened into twilight, gentle and forgiving And amid the soft closing of doors and the murmur of departing footsteps, one central truth remained, that under Poirot's guidance through logic, kindness, and an unrelenting quest for justice, even the most intricate of human deceptions may be unravelled and the soul set free.